Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So, Korkan, I'd like to ask permission to speak on Dhamma from the Sangha and extend my greetings to the lay people as well. Come here today on lost count now, 5th or 6th Sunday practice day of this Pansa. It's like we keep chanting the days and nights are relentlessly passing. And so it's very true. Again, thinking of just something to say a few words on today. My thoughts are often stimulated by little conversations we have here in the monastery, whether it's Vinaya discussions or something you hear from somebody else, or maybe something like a junior monk or novice or an anagarika with a question. And a little question or theme of discussion came up from a junior Sangha member. Just a private conversation, just about the relevance of sila, samadhi, panna, and it's something which has comes up a lot over the years. It can be, young, particularly monastics, coming and interested in the path, and obviously with the desire and the already so much interest to come. But of course, in the early stage, we're always wondering, is this really what I want to commit myself to? And then, later on, it can be that for a lot of people, one of the doubts, one of the things that's, always niggling or nagging your mind a bit, is both on the personal level, is this practice of sila, samadhi, panna, basically, does it really work? It could be, whether it's, say, psychologically, to use that modern language, can I really work through my stuff? Can I really basically find happiness, or will I have these kind of things that maybe I need some other kind of path? There are so many paths, everything from therapy to inner growth and different types of work you can do, and self-help and motivational type kind of processes that you can take on. You can listen to all kinds of inspiring speakers. And it's easy at times, especially if you're in a bit of a down, bit of a slump, it's not always up, up, up in the holy life, to think, well, is this really, working for me or going to work? And then as well, on another level, even if one feels very happy and contented, and the path of, what we call sila, samadhi, panna, basically this eightfold path, whether you're a monk or a lay person, whether you feel, yes, it's working for me, but then, is it relevant, say, to society? That can be a doubt that comes in people's mind. We all generally want to help. People can have the perception that, say, the monastic life is very much a withdrawn, inwards type of lifestyle, and it certainly can be. But nevertheless, it's still very much one which is actually quite outgoing, particularly our Ajahn Chah form. It just doesn't go out to society very much. We're not really active in that sense. There's many, many more active ways of living our life. But if you look at how we live our life here, like this morning at 6 o'clock, there's a group of monks painting early because you have to do it before it gets too hot. Then we have little things like today where we're public. And there's all kinds of things we do within the community which are very much service-oriented. And so it's not at all the case that we're very much just always alone and always looking inward or always meditating. It's just that, like I say, it's not a really engaged, not quite engaged Buddhism. So people can often wonder, well, is this enough? Especially when you think of the world problems. So this just question in general, I think it's a very good one for us to be constantly coming back to, because obviously as monastics we have this ordination, you could say ordination aspiration or inspiration, something that pulls us in to this holy life, and that has to be nurtured over time. And the kind of ultimately, so the bottom line's got to be that you feel it's genuinely good and beneficial, not only for your own sake, but for the welfare of others. And this was the Buddha spoke in this way a lot, for the welfare of the great many, for the welfare of gods and humans, or just for the welfare of the many folk. We're not just doing this for ourselves. It's got to work internally and externally. And so because we come from a society where these concepts, certainly just the middle way, the Eightfold Path as it's laid out like that, sila, samadhi, panna, it's not one which most of us here grew up with. So it's very different. If you're from somewhere like Thailand or from Sri Lanka or somewhere, where that's basically you could say the view, the world view, or your belief system is one where, even if you're not really into the details of it, you may not even keep precepts yourself or really practice the Dhamma or have great insights into it or even feel it's very relevant, but somehow there'll still be this belief that somehow, somewhere, it's the highest, it's the good, basically like typical religion or universal religion. And so, ironically, it's even people who really, are really into, say worldly things or even unwholesome things, sensuality, they still value and respect and praise those people that can give that up. There's that sense that those things ultimately and maybe one day should or could be given up. Usually, when I'm old, basically later on, but we'll kind of enjoy ourselves for now. But it's not a struggle, say conceptually, and as you may know, in Thailand it's very common, almost like the tradition for men to ordain, women to spend some time in their life in a monastery. That's considered like a good thing. There's nothing weird about that. It's considered balancing out the worldly and the spiritual, the mundane and the supramundane. And the understanding is we all need that. There's no conflict. And the understanding is without that, where would we be? It would be even worse than this. So there's no real problem there, intellectually or as a kind of view. But obviously most of us here then, not grounded in that tradition. And even at times coming from, last week somebody was asking, young man who's a monastery, been coming to the monastery all his life, saying, well, what is it about, why is there this tension, say in the West? He was talking about, he asked about the Judeo-Christian perspective that seems to now give rise to this kind of aversion amongst young people to precepts and morality. Why does the word morality, trigger something very negative? And so, without getting too much into that, I think it's certainly true then that say in the West we've basically been struggling through very difficult, painful history of religion and righteousness and everything that morality, the very dark side of morality, and basically finding our way. And it very much swings to extremes of liberalism and then kind of extremes of righteousness and morality. But what's lacking, what seems to be lacking, is the real principle that herein lies safety and wisdom and goodness. If you really understand why, like what is morality, and then why be moral, or to use another word, virtuous, or to use the word that we're familiar with, sila. And so that's got to be the starting point. And I think what for us, whether it's our individual life or then what are we going to bring to the world, that has to be the starting point as why this is relevant. And this question was, well, what's the relevance really of sila, samadhi, panna? Isn't this enough? Is this really enough? Ethics, samadhi, concentration, meditation, panna, wisdom. And so, in a sense, So there's two sides. There's two sides of it. There's the external to do with the world, and there's the internal. So I think most of us here, because we're here, we probably have a good understanding of sila, but it's an ethics and why it's important. But I think it's certainly there are times, I'm sure, where we're all challenged, and we can maybe forget just how important a foundation in life, ethics or sila or integrity, if you like, it's a kind of more friendly word which we're perhaps happier using, honesty, the quality of truthfulness. These are all synonyms for sila. You know, why those are so important, and just as a starting point, you know, we've all had these experiences where in our life we've basically either put ourselves in great danger, or made a real mess of things, done things which we straight away felt remorse about, if not straight away, then soon afterwards, and sometimes for a long time. And so it's so obvious then that sila's got to be there in order not to feel remorse, in order not to feel bad, basically dangerous. If I just think about my life, the times I came closest to basically killing myself, or seeing my friends kill themselves, through accidents, not seriously, just through being really foolish. There's usually alcohol involved, times when I've hurt myself and hurt other people, there's false speech involved, times when I did things where I really regretted, even as a child, you know, stealing things here and there, you just feel so bad about it afterwards. And then even wrong speech, even not just lying, but the kind of, the really brutal, nasty speech you can get into at school, the kind of gang, you know, teasing people or being very vindictive and manipulative and just nasty. And so these are all aspects of sila, and it's just, you know, it's so painful to yourself and very painful to other people. You know, how much pain is incurred with the third precept around misuse of sexuality. And so we're so sensitive as people, and we're really very delicate, like children. You know, you would never want your child to break the precept. It was teaching children to be good. And then we grow up, and then we do that. We do the very things that you would never want your children or little child to do, or we go to places you would never bring a little child. You know, so why is that? So we become heedless, basically. We're conditioned into heedlessness through our environment, as well as what we call our kilesas. And then when we look at society, thinking about the problems in society, and people can get into discussing that and all kinds of things. And it's true, there's a whole very important area of thinking about society and caring about it, and the kind of the social, political spectrum. And we've got issues like climate change, poverty, human trafficking, drugs, and all these kind of things. It's a valid topic of conversation. But so much of the time, you can still bring it right back down to the 5 precepts. At some point along the way, there'll be just the simple fact of, look, if the precepts weren't being transgressed, then so many of these things wouldn't be happening. So really, if in life the way to solve a problem is to go to the root, then it seems to me absolutely relevant. And so this is certainly, if I think back to how and why I wanted to ordain, you know, there are many, many reasons, and same for all of you. Why do you practice Dhamma? Many, many reasons. But there are things in your life, there are things you see when you have these kind of moments, maybe, where you get a shock. And I can remember I lived in Moscow for a while, for a year and a half, in 93, 94. And I was keeping the precepts because I was practicing meditating at university, or at least trying to practice meditating. So I'd stopped drinking. But then I got to Russia. It was very, very difficult. I don't know if you're familiar with Russian culture. It's a big drinking culture, basically. And it was a very interesting time, very fascinating time. But it was so difficult going out and socializing And being the one who didn't drink, I was also a very strict vegetarian at the time. So you go out to a party and you basically can't really join in. So it was kind of so difficult socializing, and felt the pressure, which I hadn't felt at university because I had a group of friends who totally understood. But there, so I started drinking again. And one night, I had a few drinks and I went out to this apartment block. And I remember like lying down in the middle of the road and just looking at the stars. And it was this beautiful night. And I was actually lying, and I remember it's like they have trams in Moscow. And I was lying in the tram line. I just kind of had my hands, one in either tram slot, like looking at the stars, just thinking, wow, man, it's just so beautiful. And then after a while, I got up, and then went back. I remember the next morning, remembering that, thinking, did I really do that? And, it's like lying down in the middle of the road, looking at the stars. It's just, it's obviously it's just so dangerous. You get this shock. You realize, this is what I can do to myself. I'm a totally normal person, and then suddenly you put yourself into this position of great danger. So I'm just kind of give you an example of those are the kind of little things where you just get this insight. No one needs to tell you. You don't need to sort of kind of hear it from somebody else. To just how dangerous this can be. So in a sense, if we're talking about relevance, just the basics of staying alive, just how important the precepts are. And it's very difficult when you're in that environment, a lot of pressure to keep safe. So I was there. I always had this heart thinking about the monastery and thinking, but resisting it, but at the same time knowing, well, at the very least, I'll be safe there. I'm not going to do this, or at least I hope not. So that's talking about sila. Now, a lot of us would also be aspiring to say truth, sila, ethics, integrity, as well as those words. I think truth is another factor, and truth is surprisingly difficult to find on whether it's on whatever level you're at. Say in the world, in your environment, you're trying to be truthful, and the environment pushes you in a different direction. Again, another kind of funny story. Recently, I was in Thailand, and a staff member from the Department of Religious Affairs, our local branch in Ubon, came to the monastery, wanted to have a chat and discuss one or two things. And the abbot wasn't there, so I was talking to him. And I often ask this to people, and it's and Thais are very open, and I know this guy. So I said to him, you work for the Department of Religious Affairs. Do you keep the 5 precepts? We're having this very friendly chit-chat. And he goes, oh, Ajahn, I really want to, but I just can't, So I said, why not? And he said, well, in my line of work, it's just always got to, a bit of zigzagging, tell a white lie here, white lie there, there's pressure from the boss, just can't do it. He didn't see the kind of irony. So, and it's just basically the point is it's the civil service, it's like public, government office, government service. So the fact that it was that particular department just doesn't exempt them from needing to tell fibs here and there. So that's how difficult it is, that just everywhere there's this pressure. And I asked business people, people that come to the monastery. It's just a nice, again, in Thailand it's very easy. You can be very upfront with people, They basically understand that this is what we should talk about, basically the 5 precepts. Do you keep the 5 precepts? No. And you say, well, what don't you keep? And it's, well, if they sell things, then explain, well, I'm a tradesman and I'm trying to make a sale and the person wants a certain price and I have to say, I can't sell it to you for that. That was how much I bought it for. I need to have a little markup. So you have to kind of do a little routine, and that's just normal. So it's like they're saying, I want to keep the precepts, but I just can't, because otherwise I can't make a living. So again, it just leads into a little situation where you can talk. But then also for me, it reminds me, oh yeah, that's why I think this is relevant. because it's just so much, it's so needed. And truth also has, many, many levels. When, what we consider to be true, we'd also like to be dealing with and doing, and say, involved in a situation where we're dealing with important matters or things which are of the essence rather than trivial things. So that year when I was living in Moscow, after a few months, I got a job at ABC News, the American TV company. So I was very, very lucky, and it was a very, very exciting time. The Soviet Union had just collapsed, and so things were opening up there. And actually there'd been one coup, as you remember, for those of you old enough, 89, and then there was another coup when I was there in 93, and so in the news world, it was it was like one of the hot spots, a very exciting place to be. And then in January of 1994, there was a summit meeting. The then President Clinton came to Moscow and was going to meet with Boris Yeltsin and have high-level talks. There was a thing called START, which was the nuclear non-proliferation. It was actually reductions by that time. So it was very, very important for those of us that had grown up in that period, the 70s, the 80s. It was the Cold War. You grew up in this shadow of there's going to be a nuclear war, or it's tense, it's always tense. So finally things were just cooling down. So this was really important. And so for the networks, this was really huge. So ABC News, all the anchors came over. Like, you remember people like Peter Jennings, he came, Diane Sawyer. She had an interview with Boris Yeltsin's a big exclusive in the Kremlin. Ted Koppel, he had exclusive access to Bill Clinton. They were going to discuss every evening what had happened in the morning, during the day. So there was this real great excitement, and the show was going to come out of Moscow. That means not from New York, but like live from Moscow. So for people in Moscow, it was a really, really big deal, and it was seen as like, this is so crucially important. So it was a huge build-up, and so I was there in the bureau, very, very exciting, helping making the arrangements, looking after the correspondence, and like meeting all these people, kind of passing them in the corridor or sitting suddenly having across the table from these sort of stars. They're kind of like stars, these anchors. But then when it actually came time then, the evening show, that whole week, there was hardly any news from Moscow, because that whole week was totally dominated. In America, I don't know if you remember, this was the build-up to the Lillehammer Winter Olympics in 1994. And there was this one figure skater called Nancy Kerrigan, and she'd got her leg whacked by a guy who had then turned out to be somehow connected to the boyfriend of another skater called Tonya Harding. And Tonya Harding was this bad girl, and Nancy Kerrigan was this like golden girl. And so it turned into an absolute kind of classic kind of media soap story. And then there was hardly any news from Moscow. And it was just so funny, it was just so ironic. So you have this show, and you're doing it late at night, because it's got to be, I think it's like 6 p.m. in the evening in New York. So it's about 2 a.m. in Moscow. And you got this show, and it's this beautiful spot, and Peter Jennings standing there in front of the Kremlin. We had the Kremlin all lit up. And then there's the kind of music, you remember World News Tonight, kind of dun, 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 like that. And then it's like World News Tonight, live from Moscow. And then straight away, and in Dayton, Ohio, and then you cut, and you cut to the whole saga of Tonya and Nancy and what's happened, so you can imagine we're all there in the bureau, and then everyone's just like, oh, just can't believe this is happening, because this was so important for the people there, and it was big story. So so in a sense, I mean, I know that this word fake news has become a big catchword lately. But in a sense, there's many levels of fake news, and the point was that then I was there, and I was interested in possibly, making a career in journalism. I'm interested in the world and this and that, and I just got this feeling, this is just in a sense so false. Here we are, and this was, whether it's important again, maybe global politics aren't that important, but that was the build-up, that this was supposed to be really important. It put so much money, you can't imagine how much it cost to fly over. Every show, whether it's World News Tonight or Nightline or David Brinkley's show, I can't remember, and Diane Sawyer, they all have their own team, producers, camera, editors, and they bring in their stuff. So it's like, can't imagine how much. And then ultimately, there's hardly any news from there because you got to be, so it's like a kind of soap opera. So I had this feeling of like, no, it just kind of disheartened me a bit, and it was kind of funny. I could see the funny side because I wasn't really committed to it. It's like you're standing outside. So I was thinking, no, this isn't really for me. And then a couple of months later, I remember as well, there was this huge conflict in Rwanda. It was a terrible, terrible situation. Many hundreds, almost 1 million people died within a space of a few months. And we knew what was going on. It was just the pre-internet era, so we had the AP and the Reuters wires coming in. It's kind of juk, 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 like an old-style telex machine coming in. So you'd read the wire. It was one of my jobs to check the wire and then bring in any relevant news about Russia. And so you could see what was happening in Rwanda, but we were hardly covering it at ABC. So every night there'd be news about here and there and everything. And I remember asking one of the producers one time. I said, there's all this is such a huge thing happening there, but we hardly ever cover it. And I remember he said to me something like, well, our sponsors don't really want people to be watching stuff like that. And so again, there was just that kind of feeling of how, you're bound up with something which is always steering you in a certain direction. It's not really truth, basically, or it's a certain kind of truth, the kind of truth that people want. And the sponsors, it's like Royal Caribbean Cruises, Centrum Silver, Cadillac. So it's kind of, you can see this is, I realized later, okay, it's kind of aiming at a certain market. So again, these are things which sort of pull me away, say, from that engagement with the world, and feeling now, I just somehow don't really want to engage with this. So there's just sharing a few things with you. This is why then, in those situations, I just recall sila, samadhi, panna, and then recall, the atmosphere that I touched or experienced, whether it was in Thailand or the monasteries in England, my reading of Dhamma books, times when I'd been in this environment. Nothing really deeply, personal on the, say, samadhi, panna level, but just enough to feel, somehow, you're drawn this way. It's like you have a moment in your life where you think, no, I just don't want to get involved with that scene. There's just too much falseness or manipulation. So there are many levels. And samadhi, which can be practiced or defined, is very, very technical way, concentration and levels of samadhi, jhanas, etc. But as you probably heard now, one of the more general translations, the one we use in the Thai forest tradition, Tang Chai Man, more has this sense of the firm establishment of the mind, rather than getting into the technicalities. And so again, I think we can all see how in our lives, that's really something we can, everybody, from a Buddhist perspective or not, would appreciate. Say, like, to be firm or to be confident, that's another synonym. This comes up in our chanting. Confidence and singleness of mind. Just to have a clear sense of purpose, being able to distinguish what's right, wrong, what do you want, what don't you want, make a decision, make the right decision, stick to it. Very basic, what you could call worldly, in the good sense, worldly, like mundane, normal, common or garden firmness of mind. So this is how the path works, first on a mundane or a normal level. And so clearly, again, isn't this something that would be so relevant both in the world and, internally? And this is how we can practice it. And wisdom, again, on a basic level, I think everybody would probably agree. I think probably very few people would say, "Oh, I wouldn't really want to be wise." Generally, wisdom is one of those things where I think most people would say yes. If you were to say, "Do you want to be wise?" most people would say, "Yeah, that sounds nice." "Would you like to be happy?" I think most people would say, "Yes, I'd like to be happy." There might be some people, for the sake of argument, might say, "Well, what's so great about being happy?" Or, who'd want to be a wise guy? But basically, generally, we aspire to wisdom. Just on a general level, doing the right thing in life, making the right decisions, being grounded, being, and then other qualities like compassion. And the way the Buddha taught it, again, to come back to say why for me it's so relevant and a personal, direct experience, one that you can see for yourself, is that the Buddha so taught it that these things are very much, again, synonyms for one another. I think the simile he gave, very beautiful, is of two hands washing each other. That sila and panna, so ethics and wisdom, can't be separated. And they're like two hands which wash each other. And so sila is imbued by wisdom. Wisdom is imbued with sila. So you need them both. And they're two sides of the same thing. And so again, that's something which I think is usually not borne out or brought out in general, but the Buddha pointed to it so clearly. And that's one for us to, again, see very clearly for ourselves, and if we're looking at society and thinking, well, what's the relevance of this practice of the Eightfold Path, sila, samadhi, panna? Is it modern, or is it up to, does it work today? We can just see that that really it's if we're interested in happiness, then it's that thing which is basically indispensable. So as the Buddha taught this great list, beginning with ethics and then leading to non-remorse and then several links, but generally the gist is stillness of mind, and then happiness leading to concentration, leading to wisdom. The whole thing is very much, it's a path, you could say one leading to the other, but it's also very much an integrated path, in the sense that you can't really separate these things out from one another. One leads to the other leads to one, or one informs the other. They very much inform each other. And so we have this way of just building up our understanding, so where we begin to internalize it more and more. And then panna as well, you'll have heard Luang Por Pasno speaks about it, that vipassana, certainly in the way it's taught in the Thai forest tradition, and a lot of the time in the text, less of a technique. It's not so much something you do, this, say, like a kind of conscious analysis of phenomena arising and passing away in light of the three characteristics, like a manual. It's more of a kind of slow maturation. It's more of the result of your practice of sila, mindfulness as well, sati, samadhi, and then contemplating, seeing things, looking at things, like this chant we just did. Did you notice that expression, bhavita bahulikata, which means, in this sense it was mindfulness of breathing, is developed and cultivated. Bahu just means a lot. So it basically means do it a lot, make it bahulikata, made a lot, made much of, when mindfulness of breathing is made much of. And so when this Eightfold Path is made much of, is done a lot, all these factors are built up and given importance and priority, then this vipassana, this clear seeing, or this seeing into, arises. A bit like, if you have something, maybe like the window that's really dirty. The vipassana isn't so much the process of cleaning it, more the fruit of the clear seeing through these windows when we've cleaned them. And then again, that becomes your general expression of how you live your life. So I related the other night, I think, one prayer night, how when I was many years ago, Luang Por Pasano had said to me, when I was a kind of teenage novice, going to university, he said, all right, go to university, go to college, but just see everything in the light of three characteristics, just see if just kind of weigh it up, measure it up in that context. Is anything you experience permanent or impermanent? Is anything you experience really going to bring you ultimate happiness? Otherwise, if not, then that's what we call dukkha. Dukkha just means it's limited, it's just that much. That's all I'm going to get out of it. Good, but just that much, it's limited. That's dukkha. And then anatta as well, seeing that there's no real essence or entity, solidity, reliability, stability. There's nothing to really hold on to. So just to be a student living that life, I'm very, very fortunate to have that kind of perspective. And so that's a kind of ongoing process, but it's not so much the actual doing of it, more a kind of beginning to be like a language you begin to speak. So more and more. So we have expressions like, the way it is, cultivating wisdom by just seeing things, as they are, or just knowing that that's the way it is. And certainly that can be that means a lot to us. Certainly on one level, I think we all would agree that just to be somebody that can, that's just the way it is, let go, don't cling, don't grasp. That's a really nice, kind of cooling way to be. We have expressions like, ke sara sara, whatever will be, just go with the flow, man, And I think those are definitely very, very, very important and very good kind of starting place, rather than the obvious one that I want it like this, I don't want it like that, and forcing and manipulating. But then again, as the vipassana kind of grows, then we can turn it inwards and more. And I certainly, and I think a lot of people, not so much, say, religious or particularly spiritual, not really approaching this practice necessarily from having some ideal spiritual goal. Just more of a sense of, something feels right. This is what I want to somehow do with my life. You're just kind of drawn to it. And this is the kind of slow maturation. But I think as time goes by then, I think certainly then, maybe it's a bit getting older as well, and the questions around, well, if things aren't permanent and things aren't really going to provide a lasting happiness, and that's true, and these things, then the Buddha and the spiritual teachers, they're pointing to something other than that, something beyond that as well. And that also then becomes relevant, because this is our real healing. I think one of the things, it's always interesting, is that if any of us was sick, or if any of us, say, had, broken our leg or something, then nobody would question whether it would be an appropriate thing to treat ourselves. That's never a question. Treat the body is always generally looked at as appropriate. So in a sense, it's quite all right then to look at ourselves in the mental or the emotional sense, and say, this practice is an important, say, healing practice, something which we have to allow ourselves to do. That there's no problem with doing this practice, and more than that, it's important, maybe more important than, say, healing a broken leg or resting, or taking time off work if you've got a bad back or something. Because again, without the mind grounded and healed, or well developed in sila, samadhi, panna, then as people, our lives are limited. And so whether we look at it internally in terms of our potential as human beings, or then externally the question, well, how can we be of relevance to society? How can we help other people? I think it's very obvious then that the more we understand ourselves, the more we understand the nature of our own dukkha arising and passing away, all of these things, then the more we can give, both to ourselves and others. So in a sense, in saying these things, my understanding is that most of us understand that, certainly for the monks, lay people, but I think it's always a great important thing to keep coming back to. So as monks, when we ordain, we do this chant. One of the little sections, it says Sabba Dukkha Nissarana Nibbana Sajjikaranataya, which means something like, for the realization of the complete freedom from all suffering, which is Nibbana. That's the whole point that we're going forth for. And so even if, say, at first it cannot be so real, I think that's something very much to hold up as an aspiration, that we're moving towards something which is really, other than this worldly truth, other than these sankharas, this eye, ear, nose, tongue, body and mind, these 5 khandhas that are very tricky. We know, I can't trust our thoughts, I can't trust my memory anymore, can't trust my intentions most of the time, my body's changing all the time. Consciousness, that is just so quick, totally can't trust that. This is something beyond that. And it's something really to aspire to. And certainly just that thought is a kind of source of relief and comfort, because we all want to let go. I spent years trying to let go, I'm sure all of you. How do you let go? And people always ask, how do you let go of this? How do you let go of that? So partly just by knowing that, in a sense, this is all that, again, another level of falseness, even those things which are true, even those things which are facts. From the Buddhist perspective, actually they're not true, they're not facts. The word fact, it's something which is made. It comes from factum, like something which has been made, like a factory is a place where things get made. And so a fact, but what that in English, that means something which is real. So it's a fact that this is a microphone. Because we agree on it being a microphone. It's something which is made and it's a true thing. And we understand that to be one level of truth. But in Dhamma, actually, it's what we call a sankhara. It's a fabrication, it's been made up. So from the Dhammic perspective, it's actually false. It's all sankharas, they're very, very tricky. So in a sense, there are only alternative facts in the Dhamma. Because like my perspective is different from your perspective, different from everybody's perspective, and that's all right. And it's an agreement. We can agree on things like language and microphones and what time to start and what time to finish. But they're all just, in that sense, they're very, very fluid. They're not the reality. That means they're sankharas, they're made up. It's our experience of things. And so again, the Buddha is saying that there's something beyond that. He called it the asankata Dhamma. I'm more or less going to end here, just with a bit of a question, leave you with that to contemplate then. That the Buddha's giving us an invitation to go beyond what we call, or what we think of as facts. Say, no, these are actually kind of like false facts. They've been made, they've been fabricated. It's just conventional agreements. And so, we've had Luang Por Sumedho here. He makes very much of this, talking about the unconditioned. It's that which is not a fact, it's not made up. It's really real. So in Dhamma you could say something which is a fact is not true. Something is really true is not a fact. And so that's our puzzle, if you like, our riddle, is with this very fluid, tricky 6 sense bases and five khandhas, to somehow see through that, develop in our vipassana and see through all of that. And then it becomes really relevant, more and more. And I've been reading this Luang Por Chah biography recently, and at one point it's very beautiful. He's telling the monks, when you really get into Dhamma practice, it's like day and night, meaning that you just want to practice day and night. You're just thinking about it all the time. And he gives the simile of a parent who leaves their child up on the balcony of the veranda. Thai houses were open. They have these basically open on all 4 sides. And so the parent goes down to tend the buffalo, and he's left the child, a little toddler, up on the house, knowing that the toddler can just sort of start toddling around and more or less fall off the edge. So he's saying the parent, even when it goes down to tend the buffalo, it's just a little bit worried, like can't stop thinking about its child up there. And he's saying, that's what it's like with Dharma practice when you really get into it. It's your real night and day puzzle. You just really want to figure this out. So, in a sense, it gets more and more relevant until, ideally, we take the Luang Por Chah encouragement. It becomes our night and day challenge. So I'll share these few words with you today.
Sa